My Ableton is locked and loaded.
All right, Ableton, lock and loaded. Let's get this party on the road.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Bedroom Super Producer Podcast. We are your hosts. My name is JT.
My name is BK.
And we are gathered here today to celebrate a very unique talent. Someone, and I'm pretty sure my co-host will agree, is probably one of the most impressive, incredible producer there is, all categories included. I mean, this guy literally can do it all. He did some groundbreaking work, both, in the electronic genre, the gaming side of things. He did some movies. He's very, very well-versed in, analog synthesizers, modular systems, as well as sampling and in-the-box noodling, if I may. And why don't you introduce the subject of today's podcast, BK?
So this week, we have the pleasure of talking about renowned electronic musician from Brazil, from London, a world-traveling musician, Mr. Amon Tobin, in the house this week.
You could even give him his credit for the time he spent here in our hometown of Montreal.
Exactly. He produced many of his records here, I think. We may say that the rent is cheap in Montreal.
Certainly more than Brighton or London or even Rio, for that matter.
Indeed.
So we decided to talk about Amon Tobin because first, I think we both in our lifetime have bought some records of his, marveled at his sound design prowesses, tried to understand how he was using, contact and sampling as a whole to achieve these otherworldly, extremely intricate soundscapes that he comes up with. And I, for myself, bought the first record I bought from him was Super Modified. What about you?
My first record was Permutation.
So a bit earlier than me.
I think the album is from 98. I bought it in 99, I think.
So I think that even though lately, maybe like around 2011, he made it kind of to the mainstream, but he's not exactly a very well-known talent, at least not to the level of his expertise, I would say. Would you agree with that statement?
He's not well-renowned, but he's done like a lot of different things. People who are like craftsmen in their own particular niche, be it films, be it game designers, they know who Amon Tobin is, and they've often required his services for particular projects. So I don't think he has problems finding work. I just think he's very picky about what he releases for himself and the type of sounds that he makes. That's why he's not out there. I don't think he's doing that to be famous.
Yeah, I think that's something that strikes me every time I hear him in an interview. I think he really doesn't care about if people likes his work or not, and he really is just trying to, I guess, communicate his innermost feelings in a way through his music. At least that's what he says in an interview, and I think that's fair because obviously his sounds are usually very obscure. He doesn't really follow any kind of format when it comes to sequencing his tracks, and maybe that's why not enough people know about his incredible work.
I've seen an interview where he says that the way he makes music and the fact that he has a career, it's not supposed to have worked. and he didn't follow the traditional way of doing things. He doesn't tour that much anymore. He didn't tour that much back then either. Yes, he's a DJ, and he played gigs and everything, but he says that he's more of a studio beast. So he wasn't. It wasn't supposed to work out, but in a way, he's very lucky that it worked out, because I think the way he sees it is really, he's always trying. First, he's a sound designer at heart, and then he tries to find something that motivates him, that pushes him to the limit to see what he can do with a certain way of doing things, be it by sampling records and taking the raw material of tracks that have already been released, and then making something totally different with them, which in its way is a challenge. Some people might say that it's cheating, that it's using other people's work to get famous and everything. But if you've ever heard an Amon Tobin album, you know that it's not cheating. You know that it's a totally it's an art form. The way he samples is very much an art form. It's not just taking a loop of the chorus and putting some drums on it. It's totally different.
Yeah, and so let's backtrack a bit and give more of a context to the listeners who've never heard of Amon Tobin. As you've said in the intro, the guy was born in Brazil, I guess Rio de Janeiro, and then quickly he moved with his family in Europe, going through Morocco and then the Netherlands to finally stay a bit more in the UK. And I think that's where he started to produce, right?
I think he was going to film school or something like that in university, and he got into the UK just in that time where like jungle was like becoming popular and things. So I think around maybe 90, 93, 94, 95, when the whole like drum and bass, jungle and everything was really popular in the UK. And I think he started to be influenced by that genre of music, and that's where he got his first sampler, because jungle and drum and bass were made with beats that you would chop up from old records and everything, and that's how he started his sampling and music career, I think. And before releasing his first album on 9 Bar Records, I think, called Adventures in Foam. I think he sent in his cassette. Back then there were cassettes. I think it was behind like in a magazine or something. They told producer just to send cassettes, and he sent it in, and it was his first album.
Yeah, and I guess he already, when he tells that story, I guess he was downplaying his talent, because the way I remember that story, it didn't take a whole lot for him to get signed. And even after that first deal, he got kind of scouted by the folks at Ninja Tune. I guess a couple of people on the roster, I don't remember their names, but they were telling the big heads at Ninja Tune to already sign him. So he was already making his mark in the drum and bass and even hip hop, trip hop, and maybe jungle side of things. And one little note aside, I think that unfortunately here in America, we've never been exposed to drum and bass the way it was kind of the sound at one point in the UK. Like, it never crossed over. So it's kind of difficult for us to understand that scene, because we've never heard it really, you know?
Well, in America we had Detroit. That's what we had. And in a way, jungle and drum and bass would have never been possible without the Detroit like techno sounds. So we sort of had it. I think it was present, but you had to look for it. You had to dig deep to find the cassettes, and know people who could get the cassettes and send them to you, or order them yourself. It wasn't mainstream like it was in the UK on the radio and everything. The radio is a very different beast in the United States and North America in general that it is in the UK. I think in the UK it's a little bit more eclectic. You get different shows and different genres of music way easier than in the States.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And especially for an artist like Amon Tobin, who doesn't necessarily have lyrics or vocals on his tracks, he really doesn't have the format that radio heads would understand. And but let's go through a bit of his earlier works, because as we've said, he's a sound designer. He's a Foley field recording artist. He's an incredible mixing engineer. But what really defined the earlier works of Amon Tobin, I think, was really like the way he sampled jazz and layered things that wouldn't necessarily work as far as harmonies and scales, but he had this unorthodox way of approaching harmony that made sense at the very end. When he was finished layering all of these beats and samples, you understood what he was doing. And for me, that was really the first thing that stood out, if you will.
He kind of forced you to accept those eclectic mixes that he did of all these different sources, and I think that people don't give him enough credit and don't understand how it's difficult to take multiple sources of sounds, multiple sources of sampling, and mixing them together, especially at his level, because there's so many things together, like itsy bitsy little pieces from this record, and then this little groove from that record, and then the upright bass from this other record, and then, like you said, mixing them together so it's coherent, so it sounds like a song. And then even if it clashes a little bit, using repetition so that you understand where he's going with it. But we have to say, I think overall, he really has a special ear to combine all these different sounds from different sources.
Yeah, very, very special ear indeed. And I think that also, as you've said, it might be difficult, especially if you're not well versed into jazz and polyrhythms and weird time signatures and all of that, to understand how easy he makes it sound to combine these different rhythms, these different like weird scales, and make it all work, And I think that especially for someone who's not classically trained, who's never been to jazz college or whatever, and to just know it instinctively is quite unique.
So I don't think he thinks about them in terms of scales or in terms of like in which key he is or whatever. I think he just like has an idea and then has to find the right ingredients to complement that special idea. That's why I say it's kind of difficult, because on an instrument, once you know in what key you are, once you know a little bit how to play it, it's not easy, but it's kind of instinctive. Well, this note works, I can play this here, and you can just execute and play around with that idea. But when you're not playing an instrument, when you don't have a virtual instrument, when you have to find the sound, the right key, the right phrasing, it can be a very daunting task when you're crate digging. If you're just looking for like one loop or two loops, that's a difficult thing, because you have to find the right loop that's going to drive the song. But when you're using, I don't know, 50 different records on a single track, that can be, it's pretty time consuming, and you have to be patient. You have to understand what works, what doesn't work. Is it ear fatigue? Are you tired? When to throw away an idea? So it's kind of like building this huge catalog. It's a very time consuming and very demanding. You have to be like, in terms of concentration, it's difficult, and it's not. There's a lot of, you need extra talent other than just musicianship to be able to build tracks like that, without them sounding like little pieces from everywhere that just don't jive together.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's also the way he makes everything blend from a mixing perspective. And you remind me of my old sampling days. When you're a sampling based producer, there's so much more than just the sitting in front of the computer trying to make beats that goes on. You have to go out there and get records. I would go to friends' house and get CDs from their parents' collection, whereas he would probably go to a vinyl shop, invest all his hard-earned money to get vinyls, and then you listen through all these records. You pick the pieces that you think work or will work. Then you sit down, you try to make a beat, it doesn't work, or it does work. And then you have to organize all of this catalog of sounds that you've put together, sampling all these records. And so nowadays we go to Splice or we go to Google and we try to find, the latest drum kit. Whereas back in those days, you'd have to invest so much more time just to get the tools, like the building blocks. And so I just wanted to say this little tirade to salute the effort that these guys went through back in those days.
But at the same time, it's part of the process. It's what makes it fun. It's kind of like saying, I don't want to practice my instrument. Well, yeah, it's time consuming and you have to practice, and you're not recording the practice because you're practicing. You're just learning to be better so that you can record that little 2-second phrase that it took you 10 years of practice just to be able to do that 2-second phrase on the guitar and the piano, whatever. So I think on the sampling side, that was the price to pay. That was your practice. You had to know where to get the records, where the records were good quality, the type of what would work, what wouldn't work. Okay, I could pitch that down about this much, and then it turns into shit. I can pitch it up. I can. So it's, in a way, when you do it the right way, you start to understand the basics of sound design and what works, what doesn't work, even in terms of melody, in terms of blending different things. So it's another way of making music than just recording sounds directly from an instrument or from a drum. Or it's kind of like, in a way, it's a parallel between a band and a producer. A producer can do pretty much the same thing that a band does, but in another way with other tools. And a band does it with one person playing each instrument at the same time. So it's another way to see music. It's another way to process music, to make music. And it's always interesting to see an individual like Amon Tobin just push the limits of how you make music, what's allowed, what's not allowed, to make something totally new, especially in this day and age with all the tools that we have. That it's interesting to see where we can take them and not get stuck in the old ways of just making music with computers or just making music with regular instruments and just mixing them together and then trying different things.
Allow me to summarize what you just eloquently just said. To all the detractors who say that sampling is not a worthy way of making music, just go listen to those first few albums by Amon Tobin, and try to pinpoint the samples, try to pinpoint loops, and you will see what sampling can really be.
Mainly the first 4 albums. So, and it's fun because it's the names are also representative of the fact that he was doing it, right? If you look at the first official album, Bricolage, Permutation, the same thing, Super Modified. So it alludes to the fact that he's taking something that exists and then just mangling it in the particular way that he wants it to be.
What about Out From Out Where? Was that also in his sampling days?
Yeah, that was also sampling days. But Out From Out Where, you see that he's slowly branching out. He's still sampling, but he's like sound designing the sample. Some places it sounds like insects. So you see that he was using. I don't know if you remember those like today we take it for granted, but back in the days there was plugins, they were called GRM tools.
That name rings a bell, yeah.
And you could like speed up samples, you could mangle them, like all kinds of like, I think there was like 8 or 9 plugins, and you could really deform and craft your sounds with them. And I think that's what he used, and you see it how they become all the sounds become all like crispy, and he tunes them up and he tunes them down. Also, I think 2002, 2003, 2004, that's where he started to use slowly contact samplers.
Yep.
When he switched from the Akai S, the one with the detachable plate. Which one was that?
Or is that the 1200?
I think it's the 6000. The 6000 had like a detachable plate, like the control. He would detach it, and he would have like his rack mount, and he would just detach it, and he would put it on his mixing board. So kind of like an MPC, but without I think there was no sequencer. It was just a sampler, right?
Well, actually, I thought he started to use contact a bit earlier, because I was gonna say we should both credit him for putting contact on our radar.
Yeah, I think I bought Contact 2 because of him.
It was 2. I thought it was version 3, but 2 is even more impressive. Yeah, so right around that time is when I saw you using Contact, and I personally came in, to see all of the different things that Native Instruments were offering, even at that early time. Became a love story from then on.
Yeah.
And so why don't we move further into the future, and right after Out From Out Where is where I think he did his first video game, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. He did
Splinter Cell.
Chaos Theory Splinter Cell. I think it's Splinter Cell 3, the video game. So it was good timing from him, because Ubisoft is based in Montreal, and
he was in Montreal.
He was in Montreal to develop the game here, so it was a great timing for him to do the soundtrack for that game. I think it was also his first soundtrack that was released in I think it's 5.1 and 7.1 surround. And I think I remember that there was a show in Montreal that I wanted to go to, but I missed. And it was that show for the Chaos Theory release.
Yeah.
Where I think he was supposed to be, what I heard, he was in the center of the room, and there were speakers all around the room, and he did a DJ set with the surround sound, which must have been like totally mind-boggling.
Yeah, and you see, that's the kind of special stuff that a guy like Amon Tobin comes up with, He's really, he almost comes from the performance, artistic performance side of things, He'll really make it an event. If he discovers this new technology that might enable him to really convey a vision that he had for certain tracks, he'll make it happen and come to life in a live performance setting, and I think that sets him apart too.
I think musical artists have been kind of pigeonholed in this act that it's very ego driven. That's very people want to be recognized. People want to be famous. In a way, it's normal, because the more famous you are, the more people recognize you, the more they're gonna buy your records, etc. But I think Amon Tobin sees it a bit differently. He's a creator. He's an artist. He's kind of like a painter, or kind of like a sculptor, and he just makes art. And at the end of the day, you make art just to make it, not necessarily to please anyone, and I don't even think that you have to show it to anyone. I think there's tons of painters out there who've done tons and tons of work that they never showed. They just had to get that work out of their system, and they had to make art. And I think he's one of those characters that he just tries to make different sounds and use different concepts to define different sounds as he goes along, not necessarily to be the star. And he's a very quiet guy. I haven't spoken to him, like even yourself. I've spoken to him like way back, I think in 98, 99, and he's always super soft spoken, always super humble, relaxed.
I just want to go back to chaos theory real quick. And the way I remember it, it was also from a technical standpoint, I think it was, you mentioned the surround thing, but it was also a very groundbreaking effort that they did where the music would basically evolve based on the level of intensity or activity on screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And so if there were more fights or more enemies on screen, then the music would add these layers. And I think they were pretty much the first ones to actually do that. And it became kind of the gold standard now for game soundtracks.
Yeah.
But they did that like 20 years ago, which is kind of remarkable on its own.
I think the way it was built is that there were levels. He would give the tracks for each section of the game would be in like 4 or 5 different levels, and depending on, like you said, the intensity, or if you were in a fight or in a firefight with someone, or let's say if you were hiding or something, then it would be just like a base layer, just like a cinematic layer, like evolving, just pads in the back. And once the game detected that there were shooting or that there were interaction with people, that you were running, then it would rise it would add the different loops from the full song to raise that intensity, or the percussions would start working or would be faded in. So yeah, I think it was kind of groundbreaking. And today I think most of the games are like that. There's always this level of intensity that's driven by the music and by the Foley and sound effects.
Yep, I think it's become quite the way they work. So then we move on to Foley Room, and I think that one was very, very special as well. But why exactly do you think?
Well, Foley Room is, once again, we see how he is a character that evolves. He had done that sampling, like I think he had done what he could do with sampling records and real music. So he had done already four albums like that. Started tampering with real instruments and recording and mixing that knowledge for chaos theory. And then came Foley Room, where I think he wanted to get away a little bit from that. So he decided to basically make all his sounds, record them, and then make instruments with these sounds that would be playable. So he recorded, at first he didn't want to record musicians, but then he decided that he did. So he recorded, I think he recorded guitar players, he recorded many drums, different drums. I think he went to San Francisco to record this awesome cello quartet called what are they called?
It's Kronos.
Kronos Quartet, something like that.
Kronos.
And that you can hear that in Foley Room in a couple of places. Recorded all kinds of machinery from industrial stuff, pressing plants and whatnot. Recorded cars, motorcycle. Went to a zoo to record animals in their feeding habitat, just to get those growls, those lion growls.
I think it was a park safari.
Yeah,
I watched a documentary and you hear people speak French and there are these signs that are in French. So I think it was park safari.
Yeah.
Where you got the lions roaring and all of that stuff.
So that was his experiment. He wanted to do something totally that he recorded everything himself and then processed everything in Kontakt and then built his record with it. So that was kind of groundbreaking. And it did have a sound that was very, very different from what he used to do in his jungle and drum and bass days.
Yeah, and like you said, it was groundbreaking. I mean, 2007 doesn't seem all that far, but back then, to think that someone would go out with like a few microphones, like shotgun mics, and record animals and actually make beats out of that was just difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Like the technology wasn't there in terms of also like portable recorders. There weren't like all of the little zooms that we have now, you know?
No, it didn't exist back then.
He recorded on tape, actually. If I look at some of the footage,
It's tape.
Why do you think that is?
It's tape, but it's digital tape. It's kind of like it's kind of like an ADAT format type. So it's recorded on tape, but it's digital, I think, if we research.
And so I think that right around that time, he also went into even more like deeper synthesis of the samples he created. Like you said, I think around Out Where he started to more like do even more processing inside of the computers to the samples. And I think he took it even further with Foley Room.
Well, yeah, like I think he's one of those cats that he's not closed to a certain tool or anything. Anything that he finds interesting, be it, I don't know, an effect processor. I know he used a lot of the TC electronic stuff. He used the Moog stuff. He used Roland stuff. He used the Axis Virus synth. So he's always been open to different things, except that before he was more sampling based. At the same time, you can understand how you can be like that because it's cost effective to work like that. So the more and more he was making sound, and the more and more it became his, like he would make a living from it. Well, you can get a little bit more tools, things that can inspire you, and using all these different tools. Those back in the days, I remember the Altiverb plugins that he talked a lot about. Like I said earlier, the GRM tools, Native Instrument stuff, Contact, Reactor. I think he used a lot of Reactor also. So always open to different things and moving along, and it's a very interesting journey, and it's very interesting the way he sees things and keeps evolving. And I've never heard one of his fan being disappointed in anything he does, because I think the real fans understand like how he moves from one project to another, and he always tries something different and another concept and another concept. They don't want to just have super modified 10 times in a row. So they stay open to the different things that he throws at us.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic that you bring up. The fact that when you're listening for the first time to a new Amon Tobin record, I think that you're not looking for that catchy single that's going to go on the radio very soon or anything like that. What actually you're going to listen to is all of the craftsmanship and the complexity and the incredible sonic worlds that he builds for his audience. And really, you're going for the richness of the experience instead of the efficacy of the catchiness. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to savor one of his records for several weeks before kind of wrapping your head around it.
Exactly. You're going more for you want to embark on the journey with him. You want to see what world he's created, not necessarily just listen to the song and say, oh, I can dance to it or not. Right?
Exactly. And another thing that I really like, and that's why we're making this point of showing the listeners the technical aspects of each of the records, is that by creating this world of sounds, and then by really going through all of these sounds and then putting them together and then coming up with songs, and then putting these songs together and coming up with a record, you see that there's really like a process. And I think that great artists throughout the centuries have demonstrated a need to go through a process. Look at Picasso, for example, the way he approached Cubism. He wasn't doing that, portraits with ears on one side and the eyes on the other right at first. His brain was trying to convey an idea, and it took him probably 100 paintings before coming up with the most famous ones. And you kind of see the same thing happening with each of these albums that Amon Tobin puts out. First it was the samples, then it was the found sounds and the Foley samples, and then there was more and more synthesis. So not only was he recording his sounds, but he was literally creating new instruments by using the technology that was available to him to really transform, destroy, reconstruct these sounds. And one interesting thing I always found about his marketing and his visuals is that the art or the cover arts would always portrait that, depict the way he would construct new machines out of these samples and sounds.
A lot of cover art with collage of different pictures or different artists. The collaboration that he's done with the artists for his covers it's pretty interesting. Or later with Foley Room and even Out From Out Where, it was kind of like this robot that was kind of being reconstructed, and it was very interesting to see that what image he associated with those different sounds, and it, in a way, it sounds the cover sounds like the art sounds like the songs in a way, how they're reconstructed, and how especially Out From Out Where, it's kind of it would have been that album would have been perfect for a Transformer movie.
Oh yeah, for sure. The sound design is
really, it's deep.
It's both insect-like and robot-like.
Yeah.
It's really, really something. He really always has that highly organic yet digital sound. There's a perfect wedding of both, I think. And then we get to a very special project in ISAM, because last week we talked about deadmau5's Cube, and in doing so we also talked about Skrillex's Spaceship. But I personally always felt like Tobin was the one who started this whole thing.
He really needed a special way to put images or to make people dive in the world of those songs. And he said that just for him to DJ the songs in front of people wouldn't have done the album justice. So he decided basically to create a small little world in terms of colors, in terms of 3D projection for each song, so that people could, in a way, see what the songs were like. Instead of just hearing them, they could see what his vision of the songs were. So he worked with different people and talented designers and artists and stage builders to build that special cubic stage with these two humongous projectors that would project different 3D artifacts and stars and spaceships and explosions and engines coming apart and pumping to that special bass and those big huge drums on stage. While he was in one of those boxes, he was DJing in one of those little boxes, and you would see him just sometimes during the show you would see him. Usually you wouldn't even know that he was there because you were so focused on the images. And at one point, usually towards the end, you could see him appear. And at some point, I think he even had these small projectors inside with him, because they would map out his face during his DJ set, and that would appear on the cubes on the external of the cubes during the show. And it was live. He was DJing live, and you would see him DJ live with his recreation on on the cubes on the external. So for me personally, it was one of the most sublime shows I've ever seen in terms of sound and in terms of the imagery and the 3D. I was blown away when I went to see it.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, nobody really had those kinds of props and projections in the electronic music world
Yeah.
before that. It was really, again, now that he's done it, you see people doing it bigger and better. But in 2011, nobody was going on tour with two huge projectors and boxes, like 3D boxes that were projected on, and like it was really, really something else.
Yeah, true.
And I realized that we skipped another super, super important project that was released in 2009, and that was his second game soundtrack in Infamous.
Yeah, Infamous was also pretty cool. I listened to that
And
for a while.
I actually have my bragging rights about this project because I stayed at Amon Tobin's home near San Francisco while he was dissecting all of the sounds that he had recorded at the Sony studios in LA, I guess, or maybe it was in San Francisco. And I actually had the chance to see his process live in action. And it's really, really, really interesting how he would use just one Cubase session to sift through all of these recordings. And we're talking like hundreds of percussion tracks, strings that were poked and pulled and hit, and all of this weird stuff. And I remember hearing like one of the main guys at Sony that developed the game, and they wanted again to create this otherworldly soundtrack whereas a lot of people started to use these orchestral composers, Hollywood stars, and they didn't want to go that route. And so they hired Amon Tobin because they knew he could create, artificially a world of sounds for their game. And so the game takes place in this kind of post-apocalyptic setting where the city is destroyed and you have to kind of go through and survive. And so the guy like Amon Tobin was perfect for that gig, right?
He basically used all the raw materials that would have been used by someone who would have done the soundtrack like orchestrally with different orchestral percussions and everything. He just recorded everything in an awesome studio. So he didn't have to worry about like himself, like the management of how to record it, because he had resources that could help him in terms of recording, and then just take that raw material and just do what he does best and reinterpret what the sound needed to be, or keep it in a certain way, use these different rhythms, put some different some beans or something on a snare skin, or some cymbals that would make a funny rattling sound, just to have a special percussion for a switch of scene in the game. And I think his talent is really bringing all of these things together in a very coherent way, because today, everyone has access to everything, all kinds of samples, everything from everywhere, from all the sounds from Star Wars, you can have them, all the sounds from rivers and whatever you need, you can have them. But people, not everyone has the talent to pull everything together in a body of work. And since he's been doing that since 96, 97, he knows how to do that. And that's why I think he's a very sought after composer / artist.
Yeah. And there were 3 lessons that I took home from that little stay over at Mr. Tobin's home. And the first one was just his studio stamina. The guy would literally work like 14, 16-hour days, staying inside of his studio, not moving. So that was one thing. Like I was really, at that time, I was still quite, well, young, if you will. And I remembered seeing him putting in the work, and I was like, wow, like I have no idea how I could keep up with a guy like this, you know? You can do it 1 day, 2 days, but doing it like for weeks on end is quite something. The second thing that I was really impressed by was just how much, like the wealth of sounds and tracks that he could actually manage to work with. Personally, I like to keep my sessions simple, not too many tracks, not too many different versions of the same loop, for example. But he would keep everything at bay, and he would be able to manage that. And as I said, he would work in these huge Cubase, single Cubase sessions where he'd have like 200, 300 tracks. And they were basically just building blocks for slowly but surely putting together songs. At least that's how, I didn't ask him because I didn't want to disrupt his process. But to me, it seemed like he was constructing the whole album into this one single session, at first, at least. And then the third thing that really struck me was how difficult he was with himself. I remember that he, and I apologize, Mr. Tobin, for divulging some of your personal business, but he had just received like this $50K pair of speakers, and he had just them installed in his studio. And I remember that he was complaining that below like 40 hertz or something, the bass was not just quite right, and that he wanted the tech to come back to his studio to tweak them so that the sound was just right in his room. So that goes to show you the level of specificity that he has for his sound, for his music, and for his tools.
He's a perfectionist, I think. He knows exactly what he wants, and on the bass side, it doesn't surprise me. I think his old neighbors must have hated him.
I think he said so himself.
Because he's a bass guy, right? He's a bass guy. They listen to the drums that he has on Permutation, on all those old albums, and listen to the bass that's on those old. It's very important. Of course, bass is very important to bass music, to drum and bass, to jungle, so you can understand why it's so important. And at the same time, I can understand when you buy expensive speakers, you expect them to sound in a certain way. You're not gonna just, if it's worth, I don't know, if it's worth $100, $200, just sell it or something. But if you've invested a lot, you expect it to be exactly the way you want it to be. And it's kind of the problem when you have studios. There's always something that's not quite right. It's always a work in progress, right?
Absolutely. Our discussions of the past week would absolutely reflect that.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You have thousands of dollars worth of analog keyboards, but somehow, some way, there's a shinier, brighter object
that's going to make everything sound better.
That's going to make it all work, basically.
Exactly. That's going to minimize your setup and
give you more the sound, the sound. Capital words, letters.
The sound.
But yeah, I mean, I think to come back to the matter at hand, I think that infamous soundtrack also gathered a bunch of prizes. It was again something that hadn't been done before, and so once again, his level of artistry and of craftsmanship awarded him very special recognitions off of sheer talent and vision, instead of just using his big name and putting a huge marketing campaign behind the thing. Like that's what also sets him apart.
Yeah, well, he does the work, right?
Yeah, exactly. He works very, very carefully at everything that he does, and I think that his work shows that just that.
But you have to be like that, I think, with the type of music that he's making. And like I said before, when everything is based on sampling, you have to have this sort of reverence for like cataloging everything and like knowing where everything is and knowing where to get at it and understand how you made a certain sound, how can something be processed, how can something not be processed. And I think it's something that stayed with him for all those years, and it's made him a better producer, a better artist. And it's something that's not very common in all the people that work in this industry. Not many people have that ethic because they don't come from the same place that he comes. When you come from playing stuff from like a more musician background, you're bound to sound like everybody else in a certain way because you're gonna copy a little bit. You're gonna play the same thing. Say a major key is a major key, right? A minor key is so he's found a way to kind of bypass that and say when you don't ask yourself if it's major or if it's minor or if it goes well together, you can have these kind of special sounds that weren't supposed to be together on paper, but you just decided to put them together, and to your ear, it sounded fine.
And then you put all these sounds together, and you make everyone else believe also that it makes sense.
Exactly.
So let's keep moving through the catalog. We have a few more things that I wanted to have your opinion on, and so we've talked about sampling. We've talked about recording sounds. We've talked about changing the gaming way of doing things, the soundtrack, game soundtrack thing. And then nowadays, he seemed to have taken a liking to modular systems.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of a continuation of what he was doing. He was starting with sampling, then moving on to modifying those samples, and then going to recording everything, and then modifying those recording a little bit more on a project like ISAM, and slowly but surely moving along and going to the process of he always wants to start from like the basics. So he crafts each sound from pretty much nothing, right? So now instead of recording something, he creates it. And the perfect way to do that these days is through modular, because you can buy any module that's going to generate any sound that you want to be using as a starting base, be it a triangle wave or a saw wave or anything, be it a sample if you want to, or anything, or noise, and then build from there. Apply the filter you want, apply that special compressor you want, apply that special envelope you want, and then create that special sound. So in a way, it's kind of like sampling, but creating your sample without recording it. And if you combine all those techniques together, where you can create these out of this world type of sound and more cinematic sound and something that's very special that you're not going to find in any sample library out there.
After we talked about modular synthesizers, I went online and watched some of his newer videos on his YouTube channel. And I saw him craft this bass on this Buckla system. Buckla. And again, you see just how specific he is about what he wants to achieve, like what kind of sound. It's really something. And he went from being the master of contact to the master of field recordings to being now the master of patching up incredible bass sounds on modular synthesizers. It's really quite something.
It's the same thing, you know. It's just that you're using different mediums. Say if you can use a synthesizer, a software synth, you can do modular. It's just that you're patching the chords yourself. It's just that when you're starting out, it's a little bit more complicated. But when you know exactly what you want to get out of it, it's just a cable that you put in and you try stuff out. And there's just something about patching something yourself that gives it that feeling, that humanness, that imperfection, that little something that you don't know where it's from, but it works, and at the end it gives some very good results.
And I think that also that he seems to never be afraid of learning something new that is quite complex, because you see him sequencing the bass line on this really old school thing like the step sequencer, and I mean, personally, I wouldn't have the patience to go through that process. And even after he's sequenced some, like, to me, something that sounded like a perfectly great bass line, he goes in and just retweaks the whole sound and repatches it to have a second layer and a bunch of different operations that he does on the modular system. And it's again, it's just a great example of how a perfectionist he is when it comes to building unheard before sounds.
It comes from what you were talking about earlier. He's not afraid to spend fucking 12-hour days in the studio.
I mean, if you want to get to his level, you will have to put in those kinds of hours.
Exactly, because if you want to do 2 hours, you can't be messing like that. You need something that's, you can recall the presets, the patch was done on another day, or the preset already exists, and boom, you do your track, move along, and you do it. But at the same time, when you do it like that, so I've noticed this over the years, don't you find that the more we try to optimize things, the more you create presets, like your own presets and everything, that even when you have your own way of doing things, it's still sounding generic, because you're doing it the same way that everyone is doing it. You're patching a VST on a MIDI track, and you're playing it on a MIDI keyboard, and that's it. It's when you're using the same sequence, of course you're going to hear records that sound exactly the same year after year after year after year. When it's the same thing for DJs. It's the same, like, so in a way, the way he's doing it, it prevents that, but it takes so long, because you have to patch the thing. You have to find the sound. You have to record it. You have to create the patch. And the patch, you can't recall it. You realize that you needed something else. You redo it. Oh, it's not the same thing. It was more humid yesterday, so it sounded a little bit different. The power wasn't quite the same way, so it sounds a little bit different. All these kinds of things, it makes your life harder. But at the end of the day, I find that it gives your samples and your raw material, it gives them life.
Look, there's so many great things we could say about what we've learned over the years from Amon Tobin. I would just like to say, the way I see things, pound for pound, he's one of the greatest to ever do it, for sure. Like, I like my producers knowledgeable, as well as, being able to put out a great banger. I think that Tobin does both extremely, extremely well. Like you've said earlier, he's created his own little lane where he doesn't have to please anyone. His fans know that he'll come up with something special and unique every time. And that's really something special, especially now that we try to become popular over social media within, a few hours, days, months.
Just looking at the likes, or who likes what, and who gave you a wrongful comment on YouTube.
Yeah, it's and we all fall prey to that phenomenon at one point, I think. But I feel like it's really inspiring to hear Amon Tobin talk in interviews and say, I pay absolutely no mind to all of that. I do the music because I feel I need to express myself and deliver this music. And then if somebody likes it, fine, great. But I don't know. For me, maybe it won't be everyone's cup of tea, the actual music. But for me, it's always important to keep some of those special producers in the mix, just so that you can learn and evolve. Like for me, he's such a pioneer. He's always doing something different that is absolutely mind-blowing from a technical standpoint, from a musical standpoint, from an artistic standpoint. So, I mean, I urge all of our listeners to give it a go. Listen to a few of the old albums, the new ones, the game soundtracks. Watch some of his new videos. Like he more and more, he shows a bit of his process in the studio. And like I said, even if it's not your cup of tea, you will learn a lot of things by watching a guy like this work.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you.
And so for me, I'll send our listeners away with one track recommendation, and that would be the very first track on the infamous soundtrack. The track is called Rabel Rouser. For me, that's really a great example of what he does and how catchy he makes obscure things. It's really a great song. So what about you, BK?
I'm kind of torn because I love so much of his stuff. For me, I'm gonna say classic. I have to say something like "Get Your Snack On Super Modified" is the rhythm and the drums, and there's just something. I remember listening to this album on and on in Montreal, in the streets, in the metro, everywhere, and it's such there's something about the Super Modified album that I still love to this day. So for me, it'd be Get Your Snack On.
Great pick. Very classic. All right, so great talk, BK. I think that we certainly have some ammo to drive our listeners' creativity for the week. With someone who has such a deep treasure trove of techniques, sounds, approaches, Amon Tobin is really quite unique. And I will say also, I wanted to say this the whole podcast. If music production was the UFC, you wouldn't want to go in a battle with Amon Tobin. Listen to also his newer works, like the Two Fingers stuff. Like he will blow your mind off with everything that he's produced over the years. He's
like these days,
the work is insane.
Yeah, these days, if you want like big beats, big bass, they don't look any further than the Two Fingers stuff. 2009 Two Fingers, 2012 the Stunt Rhythms, and the more recent Fight EP. You're gonna be blown away. It's like. Imagine Timberland and Neptunes on crack. That's what it is.
with a touch of PCP.
Exactly. So it's like an acid or whatever. So yeah, a very good inspiration for all the producer, sound designer.
Yeah, if you think you're good, there's Amon Tobin.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so take it away. I'm done for the day.
All right, guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Wishing you a great week, great beats. We hope we have inspired you in a way to grow as musicians, make those big bass beats, and get inspired by all these professional producers that have been making their way through the music world. Peace out, guys.
Peace.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. Remember to subscribe if you like what you hear. We're on Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, Also, if you want to support us, head on to delicatebeats.com. You can find our serum packs, our contact instruments, and also plenty of freebies if you subscribe to the newsletter. Don't forget to follow us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, and once again, keep making that awesome music.